Well, we're still going back and forth over whether or not the so-called affidavit underneath the warrant that caused the search in Mar-a-Lago should be revealed. The warrant itself has been revealed, but it did not reveal the underlying affidavit of probable cause of crimes that Donald Trump allegedly committed that caused the warrant to be executed in the first place by Judge Bruce Reinhardt. Well, Reinhardt has now been asked to unseal the entire affidavit, and he has ruled that part of it can be unsealed, part of it cannot be unsealed, ideally to protect the people that are involved in a possible criminal case against former President Donald Trump. I know it gets very, very confusing. Let's do this again. Here is why so much of the country is upset. Here's why I'm upset. It's the double standard. I call it a two-tiered system of justice. We talked about this before. Sandy Berger was the national security advisor under Bill Clinton. And Congress was doing an investigation into whether or not Bill Clinton knew or should have known of certain kinds of things that led up to 9/11 that possibly could have thwarted 9/11. So Sandy Berger, his national security advisor, is in the National Archive looking at documents in order to prepare for his testimony. He stuffs documents in his pants, I kid you not, puts them in his pants, and apparently destroys some, got caught by the guy at the desk at the National Archives, and after that, Sandy Berger was given pretty much a slap on the wrist. He lost his security clearance for a few years. He voluntarily surrendered his law license, had to pay a fine. Outside of that, that was it. No SWAT type search at his home, nothing like that. Then you have Lois Lerner. Lois Lerner was the head of the tax exempt section at the IRS, and she was withholding the approval of conservative charities so that their donors would be able to get their donations tax exempt. So she got a subpoena, ignored the subpoena, and pled the fifth a bunch of times, was allowed to gracefully retire, and now she's living in her nice suburban house, enjoying her nice suburban pension. And then there's Eric Holder. Eric Holder is the first and only AG, Attorney General, to be found in criminal contempt of Congress. Why? Defied a subpoena to turn over documents pertaining to that scheme called Fast and Furious. It was a gun walking scheme where the feds allowed illegal guns to go out of the country in order to presumably bust the drug cartels that were buying them. The guns ended up somehow missing, and guns were found on both sides of the border, and one of them was used to kill a U.S. Border Patrol agent. So Congress subpoenaed documents. Eric Holder didn't turn over the documents. He was found in criminal contempt of Congress, as I mentioned, and the Republicans took him to court. Obama-appointed judge allowed things to go back and forth until 5 years later, we think, all the documents were finally turned over. I say we think because Jason Chaffetz, Republican in the House, at the time said he doesn't believe all the documents were turned over. And that, of course, brings us to Hillary Clinton. She was accused of violating the Espionage Act, the same act that Donald Trump allegedly has violated, by having, in her case, an unsecured server in her basement, on which she sent and received information that was classified, even though she denied it, and then modified her denial and said, well, I didn't send or receive any information that was stamped as classified. Turned out she did. And FBI Comey does this big presentation where he talks about how reckless she was, how careless she was, how there's no evidence that her server was hacked, but there is evidence that the emails to whom she sent top secret information might have been intercepted and hacked. But then finally he said, but she lacked the intent to violate the act, even though the specific provision in question did not require intent. So some of us believe there's a two-tiered system of justice, and one of those includes Andy McCarthy, former U.S. attorney and Fox News analyst.
I think it's deeper than that, though, John. You know, the FBI started out as the embodiment of J. Edgar Hoover, and there's an entire history of politicized behavior that we hoped in the 80s and 90s that the Bureau had kind of grown out of. But I think in the era of jihadist terrorism, they kind of lost their identity as a police force and became more of an intelligence force. Yeah. And it's a very different discipline. And I think it's given them less respect for, you know, the due process standards, the Bill of Rights protections that are really the heartbeat of criminal law enforcement. And that's what I think you have to worry about, that the Bureau's culture has changed, and that they're overly comfortable getting involved in politics when we should want them a million miles away from politics.
And it's also interesting how all of a sudden the left is defending the FBI. I remember when the FBI was considered to be almost Gestapo. The FBI was surveilling Martin Luther King. Attorney General Robert Kennedy allowed J. Edgar Hoover, then the head of the FBI, approved his request to wiretap Martin Luther King. And many of the members of the Black Panther also agreed that the FBI was illegally surveilling them. And so for a lot of times in our nation's history, people on the left hated the FBI. Now all of a sudden the FBI are the good guys. And people are now on the left saying, well, who is now saying defund the FBI? The very Republicans that were attacking us for saying defund the police. One more time. Can you please cite me the name of the Republican senator or the name of the Republican member of the House who says defund the FBI? I can cite members of Congress who said that about the police, including Ilhan Omar, and the Vice President Kamala Harris even said we ought to reimagine the police. So I don't know anybody on the right in politics, elected politician, who's talking about defund the FBI. We're talking about is what Andy McCarthy just said, and that is to make sure they stay out of politics. And it sure reeks of politics to me. Now, Paul Kinzinger is one of the 2 Republican members of the January 6th committee. He is not up for re-election. By the way, of the 10 House members that voted to impeach Donald Trump, only 2 remain now in Congress. Here is what Kinzinger said about Mike Pompeo. And the reason this is important is because, as I've told you before, the idea that if Donald Trump were to leave the stage, all of a sudden Democrats would stop calling Republicans fascists and Nazis. No, they won't. They'll just change the name of the person they're calling a fascist and a Nazi.
Look, I blame Joe Biden for what happened in Afghanistan. I also blame Mike Pompeo. You don't have to pick a side here. They're all to blame. And he's trying to run for president. Let's just be clear. He wants to run for president. He knows that he cannot go after Trump and run for president. He's hoping Trump doesn't run and he can use that lane.
So if you don't attack Donald Trump for, quote, the big lie about January 6th, you're equally complicit. So Paul Kinzinger says he also blames Mike Pompeo.
So he's trying to walk a tightrope. That is somebody without a moral center. And he had a moral center.
So now anybody that does not attack Donald Trump for allegedly promoting the big lie on January 6th lacks a moral center. It won't matter if it's Ron DeSantis who's a nominee, if it's anybody else who's a nominee, if it's Mike Pompeo, he or she will be accused of lacking a moral center because, after all, they did not denounce Donald Trump. So it won't matter.
So I don't know what happened when he went off to the administration, but I guess power is very, very attractive to some people. As they always say, power corrupts. And in this case, it's sad to see my friend gone the way he's gone. If he could just tell the truth, I know he did some actually heroic things within the administration to prevent disaster, but he's trying to pick the Trump side because he thinks he can be president that way.
Wow. Is it not possible, just stay with me for a second, is it not possible that Mike Pompeo is being honest about what he believes? Is that at all possible? Is that at all possible? Maybe Mike Pompeo doesn't believe that Donald Trump was spreading the big lie. Maybe Mike Pompeo doesn't believe that the election in 2020 was completely on the up and up. And maybe he feels that way not because he wants to be president, not because he's been intoxicated by power, but because he sincerely believes it. Is that at all possible?